In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, grant us concentration that we may learn, listen, understand, and have a peaceful mind, and remember that you're with us always. Amen. For the last video, we ended with a question. And that question was based on the sign on the tree. And if it grew for a number of years and grew at a certain height each year, how high would that sign be in, I think I said 10 years, whatever it was, okay? And so hopefully, at least some of you or most of you had said it would be the same height, okay? And it should be, because the growth of the plants does not occur in the same way that we think of animal growth. And so the growth of the plant is going to occur at the apices. Remember, we talked about the meristem cells that were at the apex. And so you have the meristem cells here at the top of the shoot. Okay? And we have the meristem cells here that are at the bottom of the root. And so the tree may grow 4 or 6 feet a year, but it's growing from the top up, because that's the location of the meristem cells. Now, some of you may have said it would grow a little higher, because it may grow up one, because on the lateral meristem cells, the ones that are on the sides of the roots or the sides of the shoot, will make that stem or that root get thicker. So there will be some growth in that manner, but as far as the height go, it's out of the top of the apex of the shoot that it'll grow higher, and out of the apex of the root that it will grow further into the ground. So that was the answer to that question. And so the meristem cells are going to be present there, and they're going to allow for continued growth, either primary growth out of the apices or secondary growth out of the lateral meristem cells. For this video, what I want to really talk about are the dermal tissues. Okay? And these are the simplest as far as the understanding of their location that's going to be there. So the plant dermal tissues are going to be the outermost layer of the cells. So we see a leaf here that has 2 layers of dermal cells, okay, that are on the outside there, again shown here in electron microgram. And so these particular cells form the outer protective layer of the plant. So when we talk about plant defenses, these would be the physical defense, the outermost layer. For many plants, maybe could say all, but I think for many plants is a better way to put it, you're going to feel the outer layer that's going to contain fatty components or waxy components, okay? They're both coming from a similar origin. And these are going to be the protective layers on the outside, the cutin layer, okay? The cutin layer is going to form a seal on the outside of the leaves that prevents water loss. Okay. It's also found in young plants. These young plants are going to contain a large amount of this that's going to allow for the formation or for the growth of the plant and prevent water loss. It also prevents water from entering the cell. If plants get too much water, that in itself could also be a bad situation. So we're looking at protection in both means there. There are a couple of specialized dermal cells that we should be aware of, that we should be able to describe. The first one of these are the guard cells. And what the guard cells function is these are the cells that are found on either side of the stomata, okay? And so they're going to form the opening, okay? Stoma is the singular portion or singular term for stomata. And they're going to be found on either side of that, and they're going to regulate the opening and closing. And this is going to be caused by a change in turgor pressure inside the cells. So if we look at the cells here on the bottom of the slide, we have an example of movement from closed stoma to open stoma. And notice what's happening. Okay, I mentioned before with the cells this central vacuole. The central vacuole is a location where the cell can start by moving ions into, okay, in this case we have potassium and chloride that are being moved into. Malate is an organic compound. Again, notice the charge on it, so it's going to have ionic properties. As they increase the concentration inside the vacuoles will begin to fill with water. As they fill with water, the cells themselves will swell up against the cell wall. In the case of the guard cells, notice that on the inside layer here, you have a thicker cell wall than you have on the outside of the cell. And so imagine you take a balloon, and on one side of the balloon you put a piece of tape. As you blow that balloon up, it's going to sort of curve because that area where the tape is not really able to expand in the same way. Well, that's the same thing we see happening here. As this plant cells swell up, they curve, and so it doesn't expand as much around those thickened cell walls. And so what you end up with is an opening or opening and closing of the stoma. And so this is a very important dermal cell, as we'll talk about in a little bit, in regulating water movement in the plants and also gas exchange, as we've already talked about in its relationship to photosynthesis. Okay. So that's one example of a specified or specific dermal cell. Another one are called trichomes. And so trichomes are hairy-like outgrowths of the surface of the plant. So I always like to use the example of African violets. If you've ever had an African violet, you know the leaves themselves are sort of fuzzy or furry. They have a texture to them. Well, that's the result of the trichomes that are growing out of the surface of the leaf. And these are going to have two different functions depending on the type of plant and the type of appearance. The first function is cell protection. The fuzziness on the surface can actually shade the surface of the leaves and reduce exposure to sunlight, reduce heat on the leaf. So the leaf itself has sort of a protection in that way. The second function, and I say that they may be secretory. So in some plants, these modifications, as shown in this picture here, the modification of the trichomes becomes a location where it can secrete chemicals. This may be something that would coat the outside of the plant. It may be a toxin that would reduce the possibility of it being eaten. Something like that would be the function. So they may secrete or release a chemical onto the surface. Okay. One last type of modification that we see on the dermal cells are root hairs. Okay. And I want to make sure you understand this. This is important. These are different than lateral roots. Okay. In other words, they're not different branches coming out of the root, but they're actually a modification of the cell itself to cause an extension out into the area. And so one of the places we see these predominantly, as shown in the picture on the bottom here, is in seedlings. Okay, so they're tubular extension of individual epidermal cells. And the purpose of these is to increase surface area. Young plants, plants that are just sprouting, need to absorb a lot of water and a lot of nutrients to facilitate growth. So these extensions of the dermal cells will allow for that to occur and will increase the rate of nutrient uptake. Okay? And so that's all we're going to talk about in this video are the dermal tissues. Thank you again for watching. We will pick up the next video with ground tissues, considerably more as they have a lot more functions. And then we will continue through the other types of cell tissues. Thank you again for watching. And if you have questions, please post those questions on the discussion board on Schoology. Thank you.